You are the very being you are seeking. Upanishads. Understanding the Upanishads. The Upanishads, often considered the spiritual core of Hindu philosophy, are a collection of ancient Sanskrit texts forming the final and most philosophical portion of the Vedas, the foundational scriptures of Hinduism. The term Upanishad translates to sitting down near, referring to the tradition of disciples learning profound spiritual truths at the feet of their teachers. Unlike the earlier sections of the Vedas, which focus on ritual and sacrificial practices, the Upanishads delve into philosophical inquiries about the ultimate reality, Brahman, the self, Atman, and the nature of existence. These texts, often characterized by their poetic style, dialogues, and metaphysical depth, have inspired not only Indian philosophies like Vedanta but also global thought and mysticism. The Upanishads are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago, addressing universal questions about the meaning of life, the pursuit of truth, and the path to liberation from suffering. Historical origins of the Upanishads. The Upanishads were composed during the late Vedic period, circa 800 to 200 BCE, a time marked by profound intellectual and spiritual exploration. This era witnessed a gradual shift from ritualistic practices outlined in the earlier Vedas to a quest for philosophical understanding and spiritual realization. The late Vedic context. Sacrificial ritualism. The early Vedic texts, like the Rigveda, emphasized rituals and hymns to appease deities such as Agni, fire, and Indra, rain. Over time, questions about the efficacy and deeper meaning of these rituals arose. Rise of philosophical inquiry. This shift was driven by dissatisfaction with mere ritualism and a desire to understand the underlying principles governing life, death, and the universe. Geographical and cultural milieu. The Upanishads were composed in northern India, especially in regions influenced by the Vedic culture. They reflect a society transitioning from a primarily agrarian and tribal system to more complex social structures. Chronological development. The composition of the Upanishads spans three distinct phases. Early Upanishads, 800 to 500 BCE. These include the Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya Upanishads, which are among the oldest and most profound. Middle Upanishads, 500 to 200 BCE. This phase includes texts like the Katha and Isha Upanishads, which blend philosophical thought with symbolic stories. Late Upanishads, 200 BCE onwards. These texts are more mystical and include secondary Upanishads that expand on earlier ideas. Philosophical themes of the Upanishads. Brahman and Atman, the ultimate reality and the self. The Upanishads introduce the revolutionary idea that the individual self, Atman, is not separate from the ultimate reality, Brahman. This realization, described as Tattvam Asi, thou art that, lies at the heart of their teachings. Brahman. Brahman is the infinite, formless, and eternal essence that pervades all existence. It is described as beyond perception, thought, and language, yet it is the source of all that exists. Atman. Atman is the innermost essence or soul of every individual. The Upanishads assert that realizing the unity of Atman and Brahman leads to liberation, Moksha. Karma, samsara, and moksha. Karma, the law of cause and effect, where actions, good or bad, influence future experiences. Samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth governed by karma. Moksha, liberation from samsara, achieved through self-realization and the knowledge of Brahman. Knowledge and meditation. The Upanishads emphasize jnana yoga, the path of knowledge, and dhyana, meditation, as means to transcend ignorance and realize one's divine nature. Structure and style of the Upanishads. The Upanishads stand out for their unique structure and literary style, which reflect the oral tradition in which they were composed and transmitted for centuries. Unlike the earlier Vedic texts, which primarily use hymns and mantras, the Upanishads employ dialogues, parables, symbolic stories, and direct metaphysical discourse to convey their teachings. The language of the Upanishads. Written in Sanskrit, the Upanishads blend the clarity and poetic beauty of the language with profound philosophical depth. They often employ metaphors and allegories to express complex ideas, making the ineffable accessible to the human mind. A common method of teaching in the Upanishads is through dialogues between a guru, teacher, and a shishya, disciple. Examples include Nachiketa's dialogue with Yama, Katha Upanishad. This explores the nature of death and the eternal self. Sage Yajnavalkya and his wife Maitreyi, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, a discourse on the impermanence of material wealth and the immortality of the self. Parables and stories. The texts use symbolic tales to elucidate philosophical concepts. For example, the parable of the salt dissolved in water, Chandogya Upanishad, illustrates the omnipresence of Brahman. The story of the cosmic horse, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, represents the unity of creation. Metaphors. The Upanishads are rich in metaphors, likening Brahman to the sun, space, and a hidden treasure to signify its universality and subtlety. Major Upanishads. An analysis. Among the 108 canonical Upanishads, a few stand out for their profound philosophical insights and influence on later traditions. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Meaning, the great forest text. Themes: the nature of reality, immortality, and the ultimate self. The dialogue between Yajnavalkya and King Janaka explores the nature of the self and liberation. The mantra, Asato ma sadgamaya, lead me from the unreal to the real, encapsulates its spiritual essence. Chandogya Upanishad. Themes: meditation, the unity of Brahman and Atman, and the importance of knowledge. The doctrine of Tattvam Asi, thou art that, is a cornerstone of Vedantic philosophy. The story of Svetaketu illustrates self-realization through knowledge. Katha Upanishad. Themes: death, immortality, and the eternal self. Nachiketa's dialogue with Yama, the god of death, reveals the nature of the soul and the path to liberation. Isha Upanishad. Meaning: the Lord. Themes: renunciation, unity, and the interplay of action and knowledge. The famous opening verse declares, "The entire universe is pervaded by the Lord." Philosophical contributions. The concept of Brahman and Atman. The Upanishads are the earliest texts to articulate the idea that the individual self, Atman, is identical to the universal essence, Brahman. Brahman, described as infinite, eternal, and unchanging, Brahman is the source of all creation yet transcends it. Atman, the inner self, which is not the body, mind, or intellect but the eternal essence within. The realization of the unity of Brahman and Atman is considered the highest knowledge, leading to liberation. Pathways to liberation. The Upanishads outline various paths to attain moksha, liberation. Jnana Yoga, path of knowledge, the pursuit of self-realization through wisdom and introspection. Karma Yoga, path of action, performing actions without attachment to their fruits. Dhyana, meditation, focusing the mind on the ultimate truth to transcend duality. Impact of the Upanishads on Indian philosophy. The Upanishads form the foundation of Vedanta, one of the 6 orthodox schools of Indian philosophy. They have influenced other systems like Buddhism, concepts of impermanence and liberation; Jainism, ethical living and detachment. On global philosophy. The Upanishads have inspired Western philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer, who called them the production of the highest human wisdom. The Upanishads. An overview. The Upanishads are a collection of ancient Hindu philosophical texts that form the concluding and most significant portion of the Vedas. These texts serve as the cornerstone of the spiritual and philosophical thought in Hinduism and have profoundly influenced both Eastern and Western philosophical traditions. Key themes. Brahman and Atman. The central concepts in the Upanishads are Brahman, the ultimate reality and absolute truth, and Atman, the soul or the inner self. The Upanishads emphasize the unity of these two, asserting that the realization of this unity leads to liberation, moksha. The cycle of karma, samsara, and moksha. The texts explore the law of karma, action and consequence, the cycle of samsara, rebirth, and the ultimate goal, which is moksha, liberation from the cycle. Paths to liberation. The Upanishads introduce various methods to achieve liberation, including Jnana Yoga, path of knowledge, the pursuit of wisdom and self-realization. Dhyana, meditation focusing the mind to transcend duality. Karma Yoga, path of action, performing actions selflessly without attachment to their results. Structure and style. The Upanishads are primarily composed in the form of philosophical dialogues, parables, and instructive stories. These narratives are designed to provoke deep reflection on profound ideas, encouraging the reader to explore the fundamental questions of existence. Historical and spiritual significance. The Upanishads emerged during the late Vedic period, approximately 800 to 200 BCE, marking a critical transition in Indian society from ritualistic practices to a more introspective and personal philosophy. Global impact. The Upanishads not only laid the foundation for Vedanta and other schools of Hindu philosophy but also influenced Buddhism, Jainism, and even Western philosophy. Thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer and Ralph Waldo Emerson praised the Upanishads as profound and inspiring texts. The Upanishads are mystical, philosophical texts that address fundamental human questions about the nature of life, death, the soul, and reality. They guide readers of any era in discovering deeper meaning through self-awareness and connection to the ultimate truth. Due to their profound spiritual and philosophical insights, the Upanishads remain popular in the modern world, inspiring seekers of truth and spirituality across the globe.